Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Octopus 101. My name is John Bristowe. I'm the community director here at Octopus Deploy. Thank you for your time and attention joining us here today. I'm really glad you could make it. The Octopus 101 is a webinar series that we run monthly, and this is for folks like you who have never seen Octopus before. It allows us to kind of kick the tires together and get a sense of what it is all about. Before we dive in, I want to quickly share that these are many webinars that we host at Octopus, and they're all about helping you succeed with DevOps and deployment automation. So, Octopus 101, as I said, is our monthly webinar series designed to give new users a good, solid starting point with our product. And we host these across a variety of regions, but that being said, we'd like to welcome you for joining us here today. So whether you're starting out with Octopus or you're a seasoned veteran, so to speak, or you're looking to bring it into your team's workflow, this session is for you. What we're going to do is we're going to cover all the fundamentals, what Octopus is, how it works, and how it fits into your CI/CD pipeline. So we'll explore key features and concepts, things like projects, environments, deployment targets, run books, these and other terms you'll hear throughout the session. And as always, if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to submit a comment wherever you're viewing it from, and I'll hopefully be able to answer any questions that you pose. And of course, I'll walk through a live demo so you can all see this in action. That's the whole purpose of this. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. This session is being live streamed across all our social media channels. So whether you're joining us from LinkedIn, YouTube, X, Facebook, welcome. We're thrilled to have you here. And yes, everything will be recorded. This full session will be available up on our YouTube channel. You'll be able to check it out there and watch it again if you want to share it with your team. And since we're live, as I said before, don't be shy. Feel free to ask any questions you have. Pop them into the chat or the Q&A pane, depending upon how you're joining us, and I'll do my best to answer those questions. Now, before we jump in, just wanted to give you a chance to connect with me. If you're all curious, you can reach me at this email alias here. I'm happy to take any questions that you have whatsoever. Feel free to reach out at any time. So, what we'll cover in this session are a few key things. So, as I said, we're going to talk about some basic concepts, but more importantly than that, we're going to talk about why you should consider using Octopus. This is often too often overlooked when discussing technology. A lot of folks focus on the what and they don't focus on the why. So we'll be covering that. As I said, we'll be covering some fundamentals like projects, deployment processes, etc. These and other things you'll hear throughout the session. I'll make sure to describe those each in detail. We'll show you how to create a deployment process. So there's a mechanism of doing this in Octopus, so I'll show you how to do that. And then we'll show you how you can trigger a deployment process through a CI process or server. So CI, or continuous integration, is the mechanism by which you continually build and test code. It's typically how you start a run within a pipeline. And we integrate with all kinds of CI products, and we'll show you how to kick off one in the context of GitHub and GitHub Actions. So with that, I'll just check to see if there are any questions. Just checking the comments. Nope, no comments. That's fine. Let us know if you want. You can let us know where you're joining from. Happy to see where folks are joining from. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Talk a little bit about the why behind Octopus Deploy. So to lay the scene here. So Octopus Deploy is a product that allows you to deploy software to customers, to users. And so the way that we like to think of this is that on the left, you have your developers building code. On the right, you have your targets that you want to deploy to. And somewhere in the middle, you'll have a bunch of stuff. This is typically what we refer to as our pipeline. You'll have, as part of your code process, a CI process. That is the build and test process I talked about earlier when in regards to continuous integration. Octopus Deploy falls right after that. So Octopus Deploy is really the process that occurs for deployment when getting bits to your targets that you wish to deploy to. And this turns out to be pretty important, obviously, because without CI and CD, life can be a bit chaotic. So without Octopus Deploy, you have these sort of DIY solutions where you have a lot of folks building out solutions that are built with custom scripts, etc. And it can be a bit of a mess, to be honest. It can be very hard to manage and orchestrate. So with Octopus Deploy, we like to think of it as a much more safe and sane way to do this. And so you get a lot more consistency, you get a lot more safety, you get a lot more robustness when it comes to managing your deployments. So talking a little bit further about how this operates within the confines of a typical process, again, this stuff can be a bit chaotic, but once you get a sense of this, I think a lot of folks will understand that this is typically how software is built. So you'll have a lot of code that sits inside a repository, a GitHub repository. possibly, or GitLab. But then that code is built using a number of agent solutions, namely things like Jenkins, GitHub, GitLab, TeamCity, etc. From there, that's when really a lot of the chaos begins, right? So you have to stand up environments, you have to provision servers, you have to stand up roles and provision infrastructure, set up environments, etc. A lot of this sort of orchestration can be very hard to understand, and so it can be a bit of a nightmare to organize all this. And let's not forget, like you're trying to espouse things like continuous delivery, where you're continuously pushing code out to targets. This can be a very, very difficult challenge to overcome. And so with Octopus Deploy, we give you a lot of control over this. So it allows you to effortlessly scale your deployments through these automated and repeatable tasks. And so that's the idea here with Octopus Deploy. Looking at this at the confines around GitHub. So if you're talking about just about GitHub, which a lot of folks use, you can see this in that context here. So at the top, we have, for example, we have an extension with GitHub Copilot. We may integrate with GitHub itself through a number of actions. So GitHub actions are the building blocks or pieces of a CI/CD pipelines in terms of GitHub. You may also want to use our app. There are a number of ways in which this can happen. And so that's essentially how this operates here. And so you can see how the code will just flow and the bits will just flow, so to speak. That sounds a little poetic in terms of your deployments. All right, so let's talk about a little demo here. Let me show you what this actually looks like. So I'm going to switch over here. So first, before I show that, if you want to sign up for a free trial, you can visiting octopus.com. You'll see a site that looks like this, and you can download and install a free trial if you so wish. So feel free to check that out. All right, so Octopus Deploy, this is the dashboard. So I've navigated over here to a personal instance, but pretty much all your instances will look something similar like this. So in the middle here is where I have a bunch of projects. Projects are the sort of encapsulation of things like a deployment process, any sort of releases that I've done, etc. It's a way of defining how I'm building these things out. Typically, what you'll see for an application, you may see one or many projects associated with an application that you're building. So a breakdown of projects might be like the front web end or the back end database. Those might be two separate projects. It really depends on how you want to organize this. So projects are located in the middle, and the dashboard gives you a sort of at a glance, single pane of glass to see how the status of those deployments are going. So you can see here I have a couple of deployments that have occurred, and these have deployed successfully. Up here at the top, navigating across left to right, we have our environments. So environments are a semantic label, if you will, for defining one or many targets that I wish to deploy to. So you can define your environments yourself, and you can give them any name you want. Typically, what we see in organizations, names like staging, development, QA, production, things like that. And the reason why this is important is because you want to have some sense of where things are going. So having a name for an environment allows you to define that. You can also establish rules around these things, which we'll take a look at. And so if we jump into one of these projects, say, for example, this one here, you can see I get a project dashboard for all my deployments. So I've done a bunch of deployments here. You can see they are in various stages. If I want to, I can promote a release to any type of environment that I have defined. So I can simply click on the deploy button and away I go. But this is really how you get a sense from a day-to-day perspective of watching how your deployments occur. Now, one of the things that you obviously have to define as part of the deployment is a deployment process. So a deployment process is a series of steps that get your code basically deployed. So if we take a look at a deployment process, we click on process here, you'll be shown a view like this. This is our deployment process editor. What this does is it allows you to define essentially a workflow. So if you've worked with any number of tools out there that allow you to do this sort of mechanism, a workflow is just a series of steps for defining how a deployment occurs. So if we go ahead and want to modify this deployment process, you can see we have a bunch of what are called step templates that are available at your disposal. Step templates are the building blocks for defining a deployment process in Octopus. And you can see here we have a bunch of ones built in out of the box. So some featured ones include deploy a Helm chart, deploy something via Kubernetes YAML if I wanted to. We have other ones like this one called run a script. Incidentally, run a script is our most popular step because it's pretty much like saying, let me take the wheel and drive myself. So you can run any arbitrary script you wish as part of a deployment process. these and other sort of steps you use for deploying your software to your various targets. And we break these down here in this section here by various categories. So you can see you have different types of scripts. We also have different types of actions depending upon the type of package you have. So we have the ability of deploying any arbitrary number of packages. So your tarballs, your zips, your NuGet packages, etc. These and other sorts of packages you can define and either get from a remote location and deploy, or use our built-in repository in Octopus for using that as a part of a deployment. So if you see here, you can see we have a bunch of different steps involved, and these are the ones that we support out of the box. Now, if there's a step that we don't support, we have a very vibrant community of folks who are building steps all the time. So we have an extensible library of steps that you could use as well. So there are over 560 steps that are built on various different platforms. And this comes in really useful because sometimes people's deployments processes are a little bit different from customer to customer, and so we want to make sure that that's well supported. So there's a wide variety of steps for you to use here, including community steps. So once I've defined this, and you'll see here, I have one here defined that has a single step, run a script. You'll see that I have a bunch of configuration options that I can specify for this step itself. So as I add these steps to my deployment process, let's say I add another script step. As I execute these, you'll see them show up in this well here, which are the series of steps that I use to define my deployment process. By way of example, I'll jump over to another instance here to show you a more elaborate sort of deployment process. So deployment processes can look quite elaborate. You can have a bunch of steps associated with this. In here, we have a series of parallel steps. So these are steps that are occurring at the same time. And we can also have child steps as well. So you can have child steps that are executed based on the execution of their parent. And so you can have these well defined. And we have customers who have literally tens of steps as part of your deployment process. So you can define these accordingly. But jumping back to a simple example here, when you actually define your deployment process here, there's a whole bunch of knobs and buttons that you may want to configure for each step. Don't be intimidated by this. These are pretty common across all our steps. Basically, they allow you to define the parameters around which a step occurs or executes. So there are a variety of things that you may want to control, and we call these things conditions. So conditions might be things like, what environments do I want to run this step on? So do I want to run this in only production, or do I want to have it run in all environments or only specific ones based on their label? I can also define run conditions. I can define whether a step will execute, whether the previous one succeeded or failed, and that might be useful in scenarios where a deployment process doesn't succeed. For example, there are many scenarios where if you have a deployment process that doesn't succeed, you may want to send a note off to Slack or send an email off to a specific user saying, "Hey, deployment failed," etc. So we have steps for those sorts of actions as well. We can also define things like retries. So retries allow you to find things like how many times you want to try and execute this step again. This is useful in scenarios where you have things like network latency, where you have no control over the network pipe, and things can not always work in terms of the deployment. So this is a really powerful and useful feature for you to use. These and other conditions you can define on a step. Now, taking a look at this individual step itself, this is just a simple run a script step. It's basically there for executing code. We take a look at how this actually executes. You can see it comes from any number of locations. So I can define it either inline, I can have it part of a Git repository, or I can have it embedded in a package. So if I had a package embedded as part of this deployment process, let's say I had it from a remote location or from our built-in repository, I can crack open that package, a NuGet file, for example, grab the script that's in there and use that as part of the execution. If I choose to run this inline, I get a section here for defining the script that I wish to run, and you get a sense of kind of like how this works from this perspective. It allows you to basically execute these things as part of this process. So I'm going to discard changes and just show you an example of a release that is executed. So when you do a deployment, you define what's called a release. A release is a snapshot of everything that goes into defining a deployment. So this is really useful in the case of things like rollbacks. So rollbacks are a really important concept that we support as part of Octopus Deploy. And the reason why that's important is because sometimes a deployment fails. There might be a bug in your code. There may be a scenario you haven't accounted for, and you want to quickly roll that change back. You can do that as part of our release infrastructure because it's there. And so by defining a snapshot as a release, it allows you to define all those things as a point in time. There are a variety of other things that can also be important to set as a release itself. So things like environment variables, production, environment variables, excuse me, things like that. These and other aspects will go into a release definition. And when those deployments occur, it will utilize this as part of that. Now, what's really great about this is that everything is audited. So we basically have a running log here. You can see our deployment history here. The deployment history tracks everything in terms of when it occurred, who executed it, etc. So you get a full running log of all the events that occur, not only for the project deployment, but also for your system as a whole. So you can define those things really, really well and make them as part of your process. The reason why we do that is for security and compliance. It's really important that you're able to audit and track and log every operation that goes into pushing to production, for example. And so we track all of that as part of a deployment. Now, when we do a deployment, it really depends on the deployment itself, but you can target any number of targets. We have a variety of target types that you can define. So if we go back here to our main view, you'll notice here on the left-hand side, we have our infrastructure defined. So here I can find any number of environments. I can define things like policies. I can also define targets. So targets here are the types of targets that I wish to obviously address. So things like Kubernetes, I can address this via Linux, Windows, Mac. We have a agent, for lack of a better term, called Tentacle, and Tentacle is basically a little bit of software that can respond to events that you send it. So if you install Tentacle on a remote machine, you can actually have Octopus act as a controller for that agent to do things to provision it for deployment. That's really important because obviously sometimes you want to define configs and other types of values on the machine itself. And so by having this little agent running called Tentacle, it allows you to do those operations very easily. But you can also do this to various cloud regions, cloud targets as well. So Azure, AWS, etc. So these are other types of targets that you can certainly address. And of course, we support Kubernetes as part of this as well. Great. So, as I said, this and many other things you can define as part of Octopus. You've heard a lot of concepts here. So we talked about projects, we talked about deployment processes, we talked about targets. So these and other sorts of things is how you'll define your deployment process going forward. Now, to bring this a little bit full circle, talking about how these things are addressed. Let me just jump back to my slides. I have some overview. So I know I've given you a lot. There's a lot of stuff there. If you have any questions, as I said, feel free to ask. But I just wanted to kind of summarize some of the things that I've shown you. I'm going to jump back into a demo here, but just to kind of reinforce what I've told you already. So you define a deployment process as part of Octopus. It's defined as a series of steps. We have these built in as part of Octopus, and a step can actually execute in a variety of contexts. So we provide this visual representation of your deployment process. And as I showed you earlier, there are a variety of ways you can define these. You can define these as parallel steps. You can have them run as child steps. We also give you a means of articulating this in many different ways. So you can address these via Markdown. So this is really useful if you're in a scenario where you have a team of people using Octopus and you want to document what these steps do. Giving notes capabilities allows you to do that. As I mentioned before, you can execute these steps in parallel. You can also define what are called environment labels. This is a really powerful mechanism. What this allows you to do is basically say, this step will only run in these environments. And that gives you flexibility in your deployment processes. So you can say, run this deployment process, and then when you get to this step, I only want to run this in certain scenarios. Rather than putting an if condition around that, that's a little bit more manual. You just define a label on top and say, this will run in this environment. Now, you can override that. We give you ability to do that, but it allows you to give you that flexibility so that only certain steps will run in certain scenarios, like only staging or only production. Now, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of motivation behind this. So one of the biggest motivation, obviously, is giving you reliable and risk-free deployments. This is huge. Being able to do this in a really safe way is really important. So we talk often in the industry, there's this sort of meme, if you will, about deploying on Friday. Our attitude is you should be deploying any day. In fact, you should be deploying all days. If you have a well-defined deployment process that allows you to do things like rollbacks, etc., you should be able to deploy on Friday. You should be able to deploy on Saturday and Sunday. And the reason why is because obviously change happens all the time, and you want to make sure that continuous delivery is something that you're espousing and implementing in your organization. So by providing you with this mechanism built in out of the box, it allows you to do continuous delivery in a lot of different ways. And of course, that also applies to your operations as well. So we have a feature inside of Octopus called Runbooks, which I'll show you, that allows you to complement your deployment process with operations and tasks. So typically in a scenario where you're managing infrastructure, you might use a third-party tool or scripts for doing that. You don't have to do that. You can define those as part of what we call runbooks inside of Octopus and allows you to execute those in concert with your deployment processes, which is great. And the reason why this is important is because oftentimes you'll find that these tasks execute as part of a deployment process. So things like emergency operations or routine tasks, restarting servers, configuring web servers, backing up databases, these and other types of operations you can certainly execute as part of Octopus through this facility called the Runbooks. So we have a question here, Will from Dave. Will you cover tenants? Absolutely. I'll make sure to cover that in a second here. So tenants are a facility that allows you to define a variant of a deployment target based on a name. And it allows you to get a really, really nice deployment scenario supported. We'll talk about that in the next demo. I'll show that off in just a sec. So tenants are actually one of the most important features that a lot of customers who are far more mature in terms of their usage of Octopus love. They love tenants, and it's a really great feature. In fact, it's something that I'll mention here in just a second. If you're utilizing or targeting Kubernetes, this is something that we obviously handle out of the box, whether you're utilizing Helm or you're utilizing various other technologies associated with containers. That is certainly something that we support. And then, as I was saying before, attendance is something that we obviously support. This allows you to basically define your deployment process and have it tailored based on the scenario in which you're targeting. So oftentimes, a lot of folks will have a scenario where I'm deploying to a lot of different locations. And rather than defining those locations as physical sort of servers, iron, etc., that I'm deploying to, what I may want to do is define them as a tenant, which is a sort of classification of where that is going. Tenants are a really powerful concept, and a common scenario is like I might have tenants defined based on their geographic location or the type of tenant that they are. And we see this a lot with customers where they utilize tenancy for defining how their app will be deployed. The reason why you may want to do this is because those geos where those applications are being deployed to may want to work differently based on their location. So you may be running a store and you may have a bunch of locations in, say, the east and then the west of your country. And you may want to deploy a different version of your software to the west versus the east. By defining those as tenants, as we call them, you can get control over how those deployments work. And that's a feature we have built in out of the box with Octopus. Of course, I mentioned the audit log and everything, how everything is tracked. This is really, really important, obviously, in various industries for compliance and for security and governance. And so this is something that we deeply support throughout the entire product. Not only do we track everything at a system level, but we track everything down to the project level as well. In addition to that, if you want, you can obviously offshoot that audit stream to a third party. So out of the box, we support a variety of different third party providers. I just mentioned two here, like Sumo or Splunk. Many others exist, obviously, and so we support all of those. In addition to that, you can also control Octopus through a variety of means. Oftentimes, when we talk about pipelines, we talk about how things occur from left to right. Another thing that can come into the mix is obviously rather than CI controlling the process by which a pipeline executes, you can have this executed based on change management. So oftentimes you'll see things like ITSM systems, things like ServiceNow, Jira Service Management. they'll have controllers that will approve deployments through those tools. We support that, and you can integrate with those tools. And so essentially, those tools act as an arbiter for the deployment occurring through Octopus. All right, let's jump back into a demo here where we show some integration with CI products, and I'll show off tenants as well. So jumping back to my scenario here. By the way, if you start up your own instance, you can certainly kick the tires yourself this way, but you can take a look at our samples instance as well, which we talk a lot about. If you've ever talked to us in a conference, we have demo.octopus.app. We also have samples.octopus.app that you can also talk to as well if you want to take a look at that as well. And these have a variety of built-in scenarios that you can take a look at if you're so inclined. So these and other scenarios are obviously supported through a variety of different means. So taking a look at the example here, this is jumping back to the more complicated example where we have a scenario that I'm wanting to utilize a deployment process. I can define my deployment process in a number of ways. I can also define my deployment process as in the context of a series of tenants. So by way of example here, and this is available up on our samples instance, here's an example of utilizing a feature we have called tenants. So tenants here are defined for a variety of fictitious locations. Let's say I'm running a pet clinic, whatever, so it's a scenario that you can envision. And I have different locations or different clinics that I want to deploy to. I can define these as tenants. And in addition to that, I can define tags on those tenants. So not only can I deploy to individual tenants that I denote, I can also give tags to these tenants. So I can have a sort of subgrouping of those tenants. So I can say that Capital City and Des Moines fall under Central US, whereas Dogbox falls under East, and LA is obviously West, etc. So if I wanted to, I could actually have these tenants and these tenant tags apply to various deployments that I'm executing. And so it gives me that optionality, if you will, for doing deployments. Tenants can also be associated with environments. So environments, as I said before, are those sort of named collections of targets that I'm utilizing. So if we jump back here into the environment section, you see I have a variety of environments defined. I can also denote or apply those environments to various tenants as well if I wanted to. So that turns out to be a really powerful mechanism for utilizing tenants as part of this deployment. So taking a look at an example of, how do deployments actually kick off in terms of or in the context of Octopus? That typically occurs in the context of a CI process or server. A good example of this might be something like GitHub. So sorry for the context switch there, the contrast. But so GitHub, here's an example repo. It really doesn't matter what the code is here. So I just wanted to show the integration here with something like GitHub. So in GitHub, you'll typically have this well-known location called github.github/workflows. And this is what they call GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions is basically the marketing term they use for defining workflows within GitHub. And these are basically your CI processes. This is how you define a process for doing work through a workflow within GitHub itself. So you can see I have a bunch of YAML files defined here. And if I take a look at this one, for example, a YAML file is just a text-based format that's sensitive to indentation. It kicks off through a variety of events. So there's a whole ton of events that you can respond to inside of GitHub if you wish. This one here called Workflow Dispatch basically allows you to click a button to kick off this workflow if you want. But typically you'll see these operate based on a variety of events. In this case, anytime I push code to main, the branch main, this workflow will run. Now down here at the bottom, let's assume we're just doing a bunch of work. We're compiling code, etc. Down here at the bottom is where we start integrating with Octopus itself. And this is how we link or integrate Octopus as part of a CI process. This is typically how you do this with pretty much any CI/CD solution, by the way. So you'll notice here that we have a action here called push package. This is actually one of a number of actions that we have available up on the GitHub Marketplace. And so this action here is called push package. What push package does, it allows you to basically push or upload a package to our built-in repository. So a package is something like a DLL, like an exe, a zip archive, a NuGet package. It basically is a container, a binary container of your code. And you can push these packages to any number of locations. They can be remote locations for third-party feed repositories, or you can use Octopus's built-in package repository. Just jumping back here to show you what that looks like. So if I navigate up to, so if I'm here inside of Octopus, you'll notice that we have down here at the bottom, we have this section here for managing various other things as well. One of the things that we can integrate with is a remote repository. So if you wanted to, you could pull packages from those locations. So I could add a feed here. And you can see we have a bunch of feeds integrated as part of Octopus. I can go up to one of these feeds and pull down the NuGet, the zip archives, the whatever the package type I have, the jar files, etc., from these locations and use them as part of a deployment. Or if I wanted to, I could simply use the built-in package repository. So this is the sort of the page we have for showing that. But if I had packages in here, let me just see if we have some packages in this other instance here. If I have packages in here, they'll show up here as part of this listing. Yeah. So here are a couple of examples of packages. So I have these two packages here, their versions. I can take a look at these packages and I can get a sense of what versions are available, and I can utilize them as part of a deployment process. But essentially, this is what we're doing when we do this push package operation. And that is one of many actions that we have built in with GitHub. In addition to that, I can also upload or push build information, which are basically all the commits that go into a release itself. And that turns out to be really important if you're devising or creating release notes, etc. And so build information is like packages, something that's just built into Octopus. You can upload that to Octopus to formulate those release notes. When I want to create a release, I can simply utilize the create release action here. And this is the integration point that we have with GitHub. So create release action basically says, yeah, I've defined my deployment process. I'm ready to go. Let me go ahead and create a release. And when it does that, it gives it a bit of that now is available for me to do a deployment. And then I can deploy to any number of locations based on this create release action here. I can push this out to a tenant, or I can do an untenanted release deployment as well if I so choose. This example here is just to show you how you might integrate with something like GitHub. Now, I realize that there are a variety of other solutions as well. So, for example, Azure DevOps, we integrate with that. Here's an example showing off Azure DevOps in terms of pipelines. You can see here we have a bunch of integration points here. So I can install the CLI. I can do things like push package, create release, deploy a release, etc. So these and various other operations I can use. Obviously, I'm showing the old UI for this, just to kind of, it's nicer to see than YAML. The default now is YAML within Azure DevOps, but that integration exists. We have an integration as well within TeamCity, so you can download and install the integration with TeamCity if you want. Incidentally, it's the number one download for TeamCity in the JetBrains marketplace, so that's available for you to use. And we also integrate with other solutions like Jenkins, for example. So if you're using one of these CI processes or servers, you can certainly integrate there with our integration points. Just showing you this integration, just to kind of complete the story. Most folks are pretty familiar with CI processes, and so just kind of link those two products together. Just to show you examples of the types of integration points we support within GitHub. This is the GitHub Marketplace if you haven't seen this before, and you just search for Octopus and you'll see a bunch of actions that we support there. You'll also find our GitHub app as well, and also our integration with GitHub Copilot. So it allows you to basically do AI base queries via Copilot to Octopus. So if you wanted to, you could query like, what are my projects, etc. So it turns out to be really nice. But you can see these are the actions that you have available there. In addition to that, if you're not at all comfortable with utilizing this and you want to have more hands-on ability to control Octopus, we have a CLI. So this is our CLI here that you can utilize. Runs on the command line, obviously, because it's CLI. But you can run this either through a interactive mode, meaning you're issuing commands through a command line interface, or you can use this obviously in an automation context. And so we provide a bunch of different commands that you can execute here. Just let me see if you can see this a little bit better. So when you run this command list through the integration mode, where you're a person interacting with this, we give you this interaction capability, so you can actually see, you haven't specified a space to get the list of projects, so tell me which space you wish to target. All right, this is the space I wish to use, and then these are the list of projects here. So I've just simply run a command here saying, give me the list of projects. There are other commands as well that I can execute. So I can do things like I can clone a project, I can create a project, things like that. So these are other types of operations we support. And of course, there are a variety of things that you can target. So these are our core commands here. So you can, create, delete, update, delete the CRUD operations against these sort of entities, and you can do a variety of integration scenarios there going forward, which is great. Awesome. So just jumping back to Octopus itself, again, it's a solution that is built for doing deployments. It integrates well with a variety of CI processes or server. It allows you to do these deployments in a safe and sane manner and gives you optionality when looking at how you might support your deployment processes going forward. So there you go. Very quick, very hopefully easy to understand. I realize that I give folks a lot of things to think about, or there's a lot of learning that goes on during the Octopus 101 the first time you're seeing it. Don't worry, totally understandable. It's sort of like a record player starting up, once it starts to play at a normal speed, you get really used to how Octopus operates. And it turns out to be a really, really nice product for doing deployments once you have a handle on it, like anything, obviously. So in this webinar, we showed you how Octopus works, and more importantly, why you should consider using it. You want to get a safe and sane control over your deployments because that is sometimes a nightmare to organize inside a pipeline. We talked about some fundamental concepts. I showed you things like projects, deployment processes, releases, etc. I talked about things like tenants and runbooks. There's a whole bunch of other things that we could show for sure, environments, etc. But those are the fundamental building blocks of an Octopus instance. I showed you how to create a deployment process utilizing a run a script step, but there are many steps built in out of the box. Those steps can run either in parallel or as part of an execution context with a parent step, for example. And then I showed you how to trigger a deployment using a CI process or server. So I showed you that example of GitHub Actions and YAML executing a release. So I'm able to create releases. I can deploy those releases via GitHub through that. Awesome stuff. So I wanted to make sure that I got respective of time. We try and keep these things about 30 minutes. So there you go. If you want to find out more, we have a bunch of links that you can check out, octopus.com/docs for all our documentation. There's our YouTube channel as well, which is at youtube.com/octopus deploy. There you'll find a bunch of videos that you can check out. Let me just bring that up here. So if you take a look at our YouTube channel, you'll find a bunch of videos available for you to check out. You can see we're live right now, but if we take a look at the various videos that we have a bunch of videos for discussions around deployments. We have our show called Deployment Friday, which allows you to keep up to date on the latest and greatest news. We have a bunch of various ones that we talk about, for example, like doing deployments to Kubernetes. We have features like config as code, which we talked extensively about. These and other scenarios you can find all on our YouTube channel. So make sure to, as the kids say, like and subscribe. So there you go. So yeah, lots of stuff for you to check out there. And then finally, we have our email list that you can reach me at if you are so inclined. So there you go. Awesome. Just to wrap things up, just a bunch of other slides I have available here to take a look at. But other than that, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. We have, obviously, this is live, so happy to take your questions here. Just taking a look at the Q&A pane. Obviously, being live, this is where you want the hold music. So, all right, I'm not seeing any other questions listed on the Q&A pane. Awesome stuff. Well, anyways, like to thank you for your time and attention joining us here today. We run these monthly, and we have a bunch of other webinars that are coming up. Really exciting calendar of events that we have coming up, so stay tuned for that. Check out our obviously our website at octopus.com. Download a free trial. Check it out. Kick the tires yourself. Until next time, thank you for your time and attention. Happy deployments, everyone. Take care.